Hello and welcome to Political Insight by TVC22. I'm your host, Thomas Docting. Today we have a special edition of our show, as over the next few days we'll be bringing you a little roundup of the latest budget meetings as they go on. Now, just a quick disclaimer before we go any further. The clips in this show will be in the language that was used by the administrative staff or the councillor in question when they said it. If it's not in a language you understand, feel free to contact the City of Clarence-Rockland and they'll provide you with an explanation. Now, coming up on this show this evening, we're going to be taking a look at the budget overview, protective and building services, operations services, community development, as well as the library services. In last night's first meeting, CAO Ms. Helen Collier and Mr. Frederic Desnoyer presented an overview of the upcoming budget, explaining where your tax dollars go, some of the budgetary pressures the city is facing, as well as setting out the draft municipal tax rate, which is currently as high as 4.09%.
In September 2021, staff presented a budget that sat at 2.64%. Since then, we've had many minor adjustments up and down, but there were two significant adjustments that were made that pushed the tax rate to 4.09. The first was the impact of the organizational review or redesign. And the second was the correction of a financial impact. We were given an incorrect number, and the savings that were resulting from the changing of our benefit providers was reduced from $375,000 to $75,000. Each of those adjustments added to the tax rate close to 1%, which is what took it from 2.64 to 4.09. And I just wanted to comment that the 2.64, can you just go back? The 2.64% was predominantly, the main pressures to any annual budget are negotiated salary agreements and our contribution to reserve funds, both of which sat at about $500,000 each. The draft capital program presented to you this year reflects policies that are outlined by council. So all of the results of the asset management plan, the vehicle replacement policy, and several key recommendations from the operational review have been built into our capital program, namely the building rationalization review that's required, the new budgeting software, and moving all of our data to the cloud, which is more urgent than ever now. So the highlights in the budget that's being presented to you today, we have a 10-year linear infrastructure capital plan with minor adjustments. So what that means is everything that was presented in the asset management plan is before you tonight with just small adjustments. We have our long-term debt policy and reserve fund policy, both of which are being respected. We have increases in contributions to reserves that sits at $468,000. And that is money that's put aside to help us finance our capital program without borrowing money. We have an inflation rate sitting at around 5%. We have a 4% increase on waste rates, 3% on user fees, and overall on water and sewer rates are sitting at 3% respectively. So the municipal tax rate at a high level, you will see that there are service level increases, the $486,000, which will be explained in more detail as we go through the budget. So that has an impact on the tax rate of 2.2%. We have discretionary costs, which were actually reduced by $157,000. We have non-discretionary costs. Included in there are the negotiated salary settlements and some other things, which are all identified in the budget pressures beginning on page 28 of the budget book. And that has an impact of 2.34%. And lastly is the public library, and they have a request this year of $57,000, which is 0.26% on the tax rate, and that's at a high level how we get to 4.09%. I also wanted to just outline for council and the public where the full-time permanent staff positions are. So in my office is myself, my admin assistant, and this I need to explain is still based on the old organizational review and not the current organizational review. So the third person in my office is the Economic Development Officer, which obviously has moved now. In Human Resources, in 2022, we had 2 positions, and as presented to council a couple of weeks ago, we are requesting the addition of 2 people in that department, which takes it up to 4. The clerk's office is at 2. Building maintenance is 1 person who takes care of City Hall predominantly. Finance has 9 employees. IT is moving from 4 positions to 5 positions, as also was presented through the organizational redesign. Protective Services stays at 11 employees. Community Services is moving from 17 to 18 employees. Daycare stays at 49. And Infrastructure and Planning moves from 47 to 48. That's with the addition of the planning technician that was requested this summer. So the increase in full-time staffing positions goes from 145 to 150. The magic number, 1%. This means that should adjustments be made to the budget to either reduce or increase it, an adjustment of $221,000 needs to be made in order to have the impact on the tax rate of 1%. So it's a number to keep in mind as we go through the next 3 days. At this point, Mr. Desnoyer will continue the presentation. And thank you.
Merci. Donc, peut-être aussi pour ajouter 1% par rapport à un résident sur sa facture de taxe. Lorsqu'on regarde une moyenne, on parle d'une maison d'environ 310 000 $, mais 1% pour un résident, ça représente une augmentation annuelle d'à peu près 21 $, juste pour vous mettre en situation. Donc, lorsqu'on regarde une facture de taxe, c'est important de comprendre où est-ce qu'elle va l'argent. Donc, parmi celles-ci, on regarde encore la maison moyenne. Pour un total de 3 721, il y a près de la moitié qui va au compte unis, donc 1 282. En plus de ça, ce n'est pas inclus sur cette diapositive-ci, mais sur la facture de taxe foncière, on retrouve aussi la portion des écoles, qui est à peu près 500 $. Encore là, pour une maison moyenne. Donc, parmi les grosses catégories, ce qu'on retrouve, on a le financement d'immobilisation à 538 $. Là-dedans, ce qu'on inclut, c'est tous les réserves ainsi que la dette à long terme. Ensuite de ça, l'autre grosse catégorie, on retrouve les chemins et les conditions routières. Ensuite de ça, on a aussi le service de police qui est inclus pour un total de 320 $. Et je n'aimerais pas tous les départements, mais on les a ici en ordre. Et puis l'impact où va l'argent vraiment d'une facture de taxe.
Councilors Gramind and Lalonde asked whether, given the fluctuation of the current costs of houses we're seeing as a result of the pandemic, residents were at risk of paying more in tax. But Mr. Desnoyer explained that the amount needed to be collected by the city is essentially distributed proportionally throughout its houses. This means as long as the price of your home is changing at the same rate as others, such as your neighbour, it won't really have that much of an effect. Ms. Chantal Begin presented an overview of the Building Services Department, explaining that the city had, by September 2021, issued 225 new housing units, which is higher than it was this time last year, with the city set to exceed the 320 from 2020, which is great news as we continue to face a current housing crisis around the country. Chief of Protected Services, Mr. Pierre Voisine, took the council through some of the elements the department were in charge of throughout 2021, including flood preparedness, vaccine rollout, as well as their obligations from the 2021 budget.
En 2021, nous avons mis en place les investissements du Conseil, tels les appareils de protection des voies respiratoires, le nouveau camion PT2, ainsi que le centre de formation. C'est important à noter et peut-être comprendre que la partie facile, même si c'est un peu dur peut-être pour vous d'accepter, c'est de nous allouer les argents puis d'aller de l'avant et acheter ces équipements-là et ces choses-là. Il y a beaucoup d'autres aspects à ces projets-là. Il est important de noter que quand on investit dans des projets comme ça, nous, il faut créer aussi la doctrine, les politiques, la formation. Il faut livrer la formation, puis aussi, il faut gérer l'inventaire de toutes ces affaires-là. Donc, c'est des grands projets, puis des énormes tâches. Donc, je prends le moment de montrer mon appréciation à tous nos employés qui ont travaillé dans tous ces dossiers-là durant l'année. Donc, en plus de tout ce qui est venu avec la pandémie, on est venu à bout de livrer sur toutes nos promesses pour 2021, puis mettre toutes ces choses-là en place, puis c'est un travail énorme. In the next few months, I'll be bringing a report to Council outlining the Administrative Municipal Penalties Program. In short, we will update a number of our bylaws to include a penalty system where 100% of our revenues return to the municipality rather than through the provincial offenses system. We've been working on this for a while now. We're working on this with our clerk. And though we've had good momentum, I want to clarify that the budget, these revenues are not included in this year's budget. It was almost impossible for us to predict the changes in revenues and the activities related to set fines that are going to be modified through this program. Notwithstanding the fact that council hasn't approved such a project either. So I wanted to make sure that I clarify that even though we've been working on this in preparing this approach to present to you, it's not included in this year's budget. We've also taken great strides in the implementation of our records management software. I know I've been talking about this for a while, but it's a massive undertaking and one that is truly, truly important. We've implemented this software not only for our fire department and the management of all of our incidents, our training, our inventory, but also our enforcement. So we developed a module within the software to manage all of our interactions with the public from an enforcement standpoint. This will allow us to have a better understanding of our business and, quite frankly, just be better at things like budgeting with having that data in hand.
As you can hear, lots of work going on behind the scenes there. Mr. Voisin also had one capital project to present to the city, requesting funds to repair the wear and tear on one of their trucks, which will go to increasing its longevity.
Donc, d'après le Master Fire Plan, qui nous a sorti un Major Apparatus Replacement Schedule, en 2022, le camion qui aurait dû être remplacé, c'est le Tanker 2 qui est à Bourget. Par contre, suite à ça, en 2026, on aurait à faire un investissement au niveau de notre camion échelle, la Quint, qui nous inquiète un peu, parce que c'est un camion qui aujourd'hui coûte beaucoup d'argent. Acheter un camion pour remplacer celui-là dans des chiffres de 2022, on parle au-delà d'1 million de dollars. Donc, ce qu'on aimerait proposer, c'est d'attendre un peu sur notre camion citerne 1, se donner quelques années pour celui-là et investir dans un projet de réalimentation de notre Quint. Donc, étant donné que ce camion-là, c'est un 2006, il a été très bon pour nous et il y a des composantes qui sont encore en très bon état. On aimerait investir 180 000, étant donné qu'on est dans cette fenêtre-là. Si on attend trop longtemps, peut-être que le camion va être rendu à un tel point où l'investissement ne vaudrait pas la peine. Mais pour le moment, je crois que ce serait un bon investissement. Donc, juste pour vous présenter le camion, vous le connaissez, il n'est quand même pas en mauvais état, mais il y a des petits bobos au niveau de la tourette, au niveau de la table tournante. La pompe aurait besoin d'un peu d'ouvrage. Et aussi, vous pouvez voir, là, il y a des problèmes de peinture qui commencent à apparaître. Donc, avant que ces problèmes-là se rendent trop loin, on aimerait investir un 180 000 pour rebâtir le camion. Et en faisant ça, ma projection, c'est qu'on s'achète un 10 ans avec ce camion-là. Donc, je pense que cet investissement-là, quand on compare les coûts de 1 million plus, c'est des coûts qui valent vraiment la peine. Et aussi, j'aimerais aller de l'avant avec ce travail-là tout de suite avant que le service s'engage à commencer à investir dans les autres camions qui coûtent un peu plus cher étant donné les pompes. Donc, la pompe 1 va être due pour être remplacée là, autour de 2027, 26, 27. Donc, j'aimerais si on pourrait s'occuper de la Quint tout de suite. Et après ça, le camion citerne, qui est un camion qui ne coûte pas autant qu'une pompe, mais après ça, de se mettre dans une situation là, où financièrement, on a des investissements qui font du sens.
Merci, M. Voisin. Moi, j'adore cette idée-là. Je sais qu'on avait parlé auparavant. I think you're setting a good precedence. I think anytime you're going to want a new truck, we're going to ask you, we're going to give you 180,000 and see what you can do with it. But Monsieur Lalonde, allez-y. Et ensuite, Monsieur Laverne.
Vous avez plus ou moins volé les mots de ma bouche, monsieur. C'est rare qu'un chef pompier nous demande juste du 180 000 au lieu d'1 million pour un camion. Fait que où est-ce qu'on signe là-dessus?
Absolument.
J'aimerais, si je pourrais, peut-être faire le commentaire que des projets de refurbishment, ça me fait peur. Historiquement, j'aime pas ça faire ça. Il faut vraiment que ce soit le bon camion. Et je pense que peut-être que je mets une petite fleur dans la poche au conseiller Cyr, mais cet achat-là était une bonne achat. C'est un bon camion. Et c'est un camion qui vaut l'investissement futur pour nous donner des années de plus. Là.
On the operational side of things, the administration staff took the council through the overview of the operational services in the city, with few clarifications required over what their plans were for the upcoming year. However, the capital projects for that department are set to be presented in this evening's budget meeting. Next was Mr. Julian Lenhart speaking on the new community development department created during the city's administrative redesign, which now includes planning and engineering, capital projects, economic development, community programming, and daycares. Next year marks the first year of the city's new economic development plan, as well as having a strong focus on the return to normal of cultural and recreational events, starting with the Christmas parade that's happening this year on the 5th of December, and working towards a series of concerts that will be held at the Optimist Hall. Madame Maurice Bouchard spoke of the local daycare services, including the operational review recently undertaken by Blackline Consulting following a big year for the department with some ambitious goals in 2022.
Je me présente Anne Maurice Bouchard, gérante du service de garderie. Voici les projets majeurs que nous avons faits pendant l'année 2021. Nous avons procédé à faire une revue opérationnelle du service de garde par la firme Blackline. Le service fait présentement la promotion pour le recrutement d'employés à temps partiel pour travailler dans les garderies. Nous avons fait la gestion opérationnelle pendant la pandémie de COVID-19. Nous avons opéré les garderies régulières et les garderies d'urgence. Nous avons procédé à la collecte de données pour le dossier de divulgation de la vaccination du COVID-19 avec le département des ressources humaines. Nous avons transféré les exigences des employés dans la section ressources humaines de la plateforme Digibot. For the year 2022, we will do the implementation of the Digibot Go platform. We will be able to communicate and send information to the parents. We will follow up on the recommendation of the operational review. We will organize the opening of the Bourgette Preschool Group for September 2022. We will continue the management of the COVID-19 pandemic in the daycares. We will build the responsibility matrix and revise the job description for each position. The service will also continue the process of recruiting part-time employees. Alors, pour les pressions, vous trouvez les pressions budgétaires à la page 23, section 5. Numéro 1, salaires et avantages sociaux, c'est pour le coût de la vie et augmentation. Pour le numéro 2, 77 500, augmentation dans les salaires. Numéro 3, les frais d'usager, une augmentation de 3 % dans les revenus pour un montant de 118 266. Le numéro 4, frais d'usager, c'est la pression budgétaire pour le déficit associé à l'ouverture du groupe de 5 clients temps plein à la garderie du Rosaire de Saint-Pascal pour septembre 2022. Est-ce qu'il y aurait des questions ou des commentaires à ce temps-ci?
Merci, Madame Bouchard. Est-ce qu'il y a des questions, Monsieur Cardarelli?
Moi, juste une clarification pour numéro 3. Quand on parle d'augmentation de 3 % de revenus, c'est-tu qu'on augmente les frais associés à ça ou on planifie d'avoir un retour de clients à ce qu'on procède à redevenir à la normale?
Donc, Monsieur le maire, si vous me permettez de répondre. Donc, dans le fond, c'est une augmentation des frais. Donc, c'est une augmentation de revenus. Et si vous voyez là, les dépenses ou les augmentations des dépenses de 1 et 2, donc c'est dans le fond la somme là, de la revenu. Donc, on augmente de 3 % pour venir combler là, ces augmentations-là.
Okay, merci.
Merci. Autre commentaire, question? C'est beau. Merci beaucoup, Madame Maurice Bouchard.
Big changes coming up and a big year for the daycares in Clarence-Rockland. The final element of the evening was the library services, with Ms. Katarina Rouse discussing some of the key elements from this year, including the recent events for Truth and Reconciliation Day and Treaties Week. So it was an up and down year for the library too, of course, with the pandemic forcing closures and a reduction of services throughout 2021. One of the big changes implemented by the Clarence-Rockland Public Library recently was the abolishment of user fees, a move that Ms. Rouse said is becoming more and more common.
Most libraries across Ontario and across Canada and the US are moving towards a library fine-free model. The reason for this is because, first of all, we are not getting our books back, which, like I said, would actually cost us more in replacing them. And it also costs us in staff involvement, having to call people and create bills and such. And our library fees were not very high. And every year they were going lower because our integrated library system was so good at sending out messages. It would let them know when they were 2 days from due or when the book was actually overdue. It would let them know by email, which we didn't have previously. So we had actually noticed every year our fines had gone down by about 1,000. So last year, we didn't have any charges, but the year before that, it was like 6,000 or 5,500 that we got in fees. It wasn't very much. And this is where libraries are trending.
For the 2021 budget, the one that was discussed last year, the library was asked to operate within their surplus. Along with the annual grant, they received approximately $700,000, receiving no increase in their budget, however. Due to this, Ms. Rouse requested an increase of close to $60,000 for 2022, a matter that seemed relatively contentious.
All of that money went towards, first of all, we had to pay all of our operational expenses that we were over because we had the same budget last year in 2020 as we had in 2021, and yet there were increases. So we had to make up for that, including almost 30,000 in salaries. We also used that going towards, we needed some new shelving in Rockland as our community grows, and we have the development charges for the new books because our community is growing. We need to rearrange some shelving, so we had to purchase some more shelving. Also, due to this timing, and because also the city had done the review of the HR review, we took this opportunity to actually do one of the library because one has not been done in this manner before. So that was a big chunk. Actually, that was a large chunk of the money, as you can all imagine, consultants can get up there. I'm trying to
So
think.
the amount we gave you last year was 958,000. So whatever, close enough.
No, you're counting the school board.
Well, it says 2021 budget. 781. Okay, yeah, you're right. 781. So for this year, you know, and you mentioned it in your presentation that most of the year you weren't very much operational in this traditional sense because of COVID, same as the situation was last year. And you had started to have events back in the end of, I think you mentioned September, if I remember correctly. So obviously, and a lot of your budget is part-time salaries. So you have $98,000 approximately this year and last year for part-time salaries. So, and according to what the documentation we have, you're basically going to have spent all of that sum as well. So I think there were no reduced hours for salary, no decision made by the board to lay off some employees for some time or reduce their hours. None of that was done, correct?
Mr. Mayor, just to clarify, we actually did have some employees that were left at home, but we did have a lot of hours that we were open. Most of this year we were open. And our programs actually started in the summertime. We had a hybrid virtual model with some activities in the branch. It was quite exciting. Actually, we thought it was going to be all virtual, but we were able to hold some events in the branch, which families could do on their own, but in person. Yeah, we were open most of the year. When we didn't have the need for the part-time employees, obviously we didn't use them, but we were open most of the year. At the end of this year, we're looking at probably 30,000 in surplus.
Okay, but you're also asking for an increase of 41% in your part-time salaries for next year.
But that's because it's the increase of 2021 and 2022. We have to factor in both.
Okay.
I apologize, Mr. Mayor. My dog might make more noise. Sorry.
Okay.
I'm fine right now, Mr. Mayor.
Merci, Monsieur Lalonde. Monsieur Simard, allez-y.
So from your presentation, you have 3 positions to fill in, right?
We actually have 4 positions. There's one person who will be retiring at the end of this year, so we have to fill that position as well. But 3 just got hired. Those were ones that had left, and this way we will be able to reopen with our more hours as well.
So we saved some money there too, right? Yeah. Since they weren't there. Yeah. So we had the grants for the students, the 3 salaries that we saved on, plus we're saving on the books that we don't need to buy because we're not charging for it. Plus the employees don't need to work as much because you don't need to call up to return the books. So we're saving quite a bit of money. Right? And we're still asking for a 5% increase.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I'm just looking for a question in there.
We're still looking for a 5% increase, even though we had the whole bunch of savings during the year. That's the question.
Okay, sorry, gotcha. Okay, Mr. Mayor, just to clarify, just because we are not doing the calls for the books and such does not mean our staff are not doing other things.
No, I'm saying you're saving on manpower. Right?
Yes, and that is how we were able to get away without those 2 employees that I've just hired this week, because we didn't have full open hours either. But now that the YMCA is open again, we'll be able to reopen. But that's why we're going to have a surplus of 30,000 approximately at the end of this year.
So how much did we save with those 3 salaries not there this year?
I don't have an exact figure on hand, but I would imagine it's approximately the 30,000 that we'll have left over.
Okay.
We had other part-time employees that took some of their shifts because we did have need for things to be done.
I think, and I don't want to speak for Councillor Small, but I think what he's getting at is you're requesting money, but essentially you've already had those savings throughout the year, if I'm understanding the councillor's question.
Yeah.
So essentially, and you know, this is a question perhaps, if it's okay with the councillor and Mrs. Rouse, that you know, obviously we have another meeting tomorrow for budgets. Perhaps you can just take those questions down and come back with, I guess, a comparison as to why you're requesting the increase, if according to the councillor, you've already had that savings.
Because you can't charge 2021 and 2022 when that was last year's budget. That's not how a budget works. Whatever you plan in 2021, that's what you're supposed to charge. You can't go back.
Monsieur Desnoyer, clarification.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, if I may. Essentially what's happening is because last year, council basically gave 0 increases to the library. So she financed her salary, or the library financed her salary with the surplus that were accumulated. So basically that was a temporary financing for 1 year. They can't keep on doing that. So what's happening now is that increase is coming back in 2021 because the base budget wasn't increased last year. So that's why the library has 2 years of increases, because it was funded with temporary funding in 2021.
Can I just, Christian, is it okay if I just ask a quick question? So
Yeah.
based on your point, Monsieur Desnoyer, I just want to understand, and no offense, Mrs. Rose, I think it's just trying to get some understanding. If in one specific year, we tell the library that they are not getting additional funding, that pressure will come back to us the following year? Because that's not the way it works with every other department. If we say you're cutting that, and maybe in about 5 years, another pressure will come for a sidewalk that we cut or whatever. But if with the library, whatever we cut will come back the following year. Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, Mrs. Rose can correct me if I'm wrong, but not necessarily. It depends what gets cut. I believe it was a decision from the library board to fund those salaries from the accumulated surplus or the reserve from the library.
Mrs. Rouse?
Oh, yes, sorry, Rouse. If I may, Mr. Mayor, sorry. What happened was last year, at the end of 2020, the board decided that we would use the surplus in order to make due for the salary increases and any other increases that came into other GLs for 2021. However, what this means for 2022 is you have your base salary from 2020 with the addition of the increase to 2021 and then the increase to 2022. So you've got 2020 as the baseline, but in 2022, you have to pay for the difference in salaries that 2022 is now at. So you have to pay your employees at what the 2022 level is, which includes their increase from 2021. So that's why there's an increase there.
Mr. Small, is that okay?
It is, but it's the way you guys manage your money. You guys decide, we just give a grant. I still don't get how this works, that we have to pay for back, like it's a back tax. It's, I don't know. I don't agree with it. That's all. I'm done.
Okay, thank you. Both Mr. Caldarelli and Mr. Lalonde had their hands up. Mr. Caldarelli, you can go first. Mr. Lalonde.
It's essentially presenting itself that we, in a way that it was cut as a non-discretionary, something that it was an increase in salary. And that's why it's like accumulating for 2 years. And that's why that's the way it's presented. So it was a sense that it was a direct on the staffing and not on an overall budget. Maybe if there'd be, again, I'm not sure if there could be clearly a way of directing the library, because I'm not sure that we can. It's essentially just a budget, and they manage it themselves. So,
right. Okay. Thank you. Merci. Monsieur Lalonde, allez-y.
Yeah, and it's exactly what Mr. Carter really said. We're giving them a grant annually. So if there are salary pressures or any type of pressure that is a budgetary pressure, it is on the board and not on council. So that's the big difference here. It's not like when we negotiate with our employees and we vote on a salary increase. Well, the budgetary pressure comes back on us because we're the ones making the decision. In the case of the library, since it's the board making all the financial decisions, the pressure is on them. So that's why she's asking for more money to cover the decisions that the board have made, not council. So there's a big difference there.
Okay, merci. Mrs. Rouse, go ahead.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, had we received, because the salaries is a non-discretionary item in the sense that it is through the collective agreement and the other employee agreements. These agreements are not something we can adjust, that we can change. Last year, had we received that modest change, it would have been half. This would have been half. But now at the end, in 2022, when you add in the amounts that everybody has increased with the collective agreement, you're going to end up with sum A. This sum A is what I'm asking for. I'm asking for the full amount of what the collective agreement will say every employee's salary is in 2022. Had we last year received the increase in salaries, like I said, it would only probably have been around $30,000 or less. And then this year we only would have been asking for $30,000 or less. But last year it was not a cut that the board decided to make in salaries. It was simply with all the surplus, they decided to use that surplus to put towards any increases, and that left the city able to do without having to give additional funds for 2021 when it was a difficult time.
Okay. Est-ce que tout le monde comprend? Any more questions or comments? I think that's it. Thank you, Mrs. Rouse. Alors, on a fini 7, il nous reste 6.4, 5.6 et Capital Budgets. Je pense que si c'est correct avec vous, c'est assez pour ce soir. All in favor? Good. Alors, Madame Ouellette, je vais faire l'ajournement, si c'est correct avec vous. Est-ce que vous avez d'autres commentaires à ajouter?
Je voulais juste demander, Monsieur le maire, est-ce que vous voulez prendre une décision par rapport à la librairie ce soir, à la bibliothèque?
Oui, s'il n'y a pas d'autres questions, puis si tout le monde est correct. Alors, proposeur et secondaire pour ce soir pour la bibliothèque. Madame Chouanière, Monsieur Bouchard, tout le monde en faveur? J'ai besoin de voir plus de mains si tout le monde est en faveur. OK, c'est beau. OK. C'est apporté. Alors, adjournement à 9h09, adjournment at 9:09. We will resume the meetings tomorrow at 6 o'clock. On retourne demain à 6h pour le restant du budget. Merci tout le monde.
So the council will have the opportunity to go over all the elements that they discussed and they heard last night at the start of this evening's meeting and see whether or not after a night's sleep there is anything they would like to rediscuss. The council's goal is to reduce that local municipal tax rate down to a figure within the 2 to 3% range. But as these meetings are technically committee of the whole meetings, changes will be able to be made up until the regular meeting where the city would approve the budget for 2022, which will be held in a couple of weeks' time. So what you're hearing to last night, tonight and tomorrow night will alter a little bit. Make sure you tune back in tomorrow for a roundup of this evening's budget discussions. And until then, have a lovely night. Goodbye.